I have spent the better part of my life watching human beings torture themselves with complexity. They create elaborate theories about why they suffer, intricate explanations for their failures, sophisticated justifications for their fears. They build entire philosophies around their pain, as if somehow making it more complicated will make it more bearable. But I want to tell you something that may disturb you at first, something that goes against everything our modern world teaches us about the nature of existence. Life is not that complicated. The human soul, for all its mystery, operates according to principles so simple that we spend our entire lives running from their clarity. I have sat with thousands of people in my consulting room. I have listened to their dreams, their terrors, their desperate attempts to understand themselves. And what I discovered again and again is that beneath all the elaborate narratives they construct, beneath all the psychological theories they cling to, there are only a few fundamental truths operating in every human life. The same patterns, the same conflicts, the same simple dynamics playing out in infinite variations. We complicate things because simplicity is terrifying. When something is simple, we can no longer hide from it. We can no longer pretend we don't understand it. We can no longer excuse ourselves by claiming ignorance or confusion. Simplicity demands action, demands choice, demands that we take responsibility for what we know to be true. Think about the last time you felt genuinely confused about your life. I mean truly lost, unable to see a way forward. Now, if you are honest with yourself, underneath all that confusion, was there not a voice, however faint, that knew exactly what needed to be done? Was there not a part of you that understood perfectly well what was happening and what was required? But that voice was too simple, too direct, too demanding. So you buried it under layers of analysis and doubt and endless questioning. This is what we do. We take the clear, direct communications from our unconscious and we complicate them until they become unrecognizable. We take the simple wisdom of our instincts and we argue with it until it falls silent. We take the obvious truths about our relationships, our work, our purpose, and we bury them under so much intellectual debris that we can no longer find them. I remember a woman who came to me weeping, asking why she felt so empty in her marriage. She had theories about her childhood, about her attachment patterns, about societal expectations. She had read books, consulted experts, analyzed every interaction with her husband, but when I asked her simply, "Do you love him?" she fell silent. The answer was there immediately. No, she did not love him, had perhaps never loved him. But that truth was too simple, too clear, too demanding of action. So she had spent years complicating it, hoping that complexity would somehow change the fundamental reality. This is the great deception of our time. We believe that if something is psychologically sophisticated, it must be true. We believe that if an explanation is elaborate enough, it must be accurate. But the psyche does not work this way. The unconscious speaks in simple images, direct emotions, clear bodily sensations. It is we who complicate its messages because we are afraid of their implications. You see, the unconscious is remarkably practical. It knows what serves life and what diminishes it. It knows what brings genuine satisfaction and what brings only the appearance of satisfaction. It knows the difference between love and dependency, between growth and stagnation, between authentic expression and mere performance. But its knowledge comes not in the form of complex theories, but in simple, immediate knowing. When you are in a situation that is wrong for you, your body knows it immediately. There is a contraction, a heaviness, a sense of something being out of alignment. When you are with people who drain your life force, some part of you recognizes it instantly. When you are pursuing goals that belong to others rather than to your own nature, your soul protests with unmistakable clarity. But we have been trained to distrust this simple knowing. We have been taught that wisdom must be complicated, that truth must be difficult to understand, that insight requires extensive analysis. So we ignore the clear signals from our deeper self and instead construct elaborate explanations for our dissatisfaction. I spent many years of my own life doing exactly this. I created theories about human nature, developed complex models of the psyche, wrote volumes about the intricacies of psychological development, and while this work had its value, I came to understand that I was often using complexity as a way of avoiding simple truths about my own existence. There was a period when I felt profoundly lost, questioning everything I had built, everything I believed about myself and my work. I could have spent years analyzing this crisis, exploring its historical roots, examining its symbolic meanings. Instead, I simply sat with the question, what wants to live through me now? The answer came not through analysis, but through a direct knowing that arose from stillness. This is what I mean when I say life is not that complicated. The essential questions have simple answers, but we must be willing to receive them. What brings you genuine joy? What depletes your energy? Who are you when you are not performing for others? What does your body tell you about the choices you are making? What dreams keep returning to you? What would you do if you were not afraid? These questions do not require extensive analysis. They require only the willingness to listen to what you already know. But listening means you might have to change. Listening means you might have to disappoint people. Listening means you might have to admit that you have been living someone else's life. The shadow, that aspect of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, is often surprisingly simple in its demands. It wants to be seen, to be included, to stop being banished from consciousness. But we make shadow work into an elaborate psychological expedition, when often it requires nothing more than admitting, yes, I am also selfish. Yes, I am also angry. Yes, I also want things I am ashamed to want. The anima, that feminine principle within every man, does not speak in psychological jargon. She appears in dreams as a woman by a well, in life as a longing for beauty, as a pull toward the irrational and the creative. The animus, that masculine principle within every woman, does not require theoretical understanding. He manifests as the need for clarity, for direction, for the capacity to cut through confusion with decisive action. Even the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, is fundamentally simple. It means paying attention to what wants to emerge from within you rather than conforming to what others expect. It means following your own path even when that path makes no sense to anyone else. It means trusting the intelligence of your own nature more than the opinions of the collective. But we resist this simplicity because it places the responsibility squarely on our shoulders. If life is complicated, we can remain confused. If it is simple, we must choose. If our problems have complex causes, we can spend years analyzing them. If they have simple solutions, we must act. I have watched people spend decades in therapy, not because their issues were so complex, but because they preferred the complexity to the simple actions their healing required. I have seen individuals create elaborate spiritual practices to avoid the simple matter of being honest with themselves and others. I have observed scholars develop intricate theories about human nature while remaining strangers to their own. The neurosis that plague modern humanity are, at their core, remarkably similar. We are afraid to be ourselves. We are afraid to want what we want. We are afraid to feel what we feel. We are afraid to know what we know. So we complicate these fears, dress them up in sophisticated language, analyze them from every angle, hoping that somehow understanding them will eliminate the need to face them directly. But the psyche is not interested in our complications. It continues to send the same simple messages over and over until we finally listen. The dreams become more vivid, the symptoms more pronounced, the sense of being out of alignment more undeniable. Life itself conspires to strip away our complicated defenses and return us to simple truth. This is not to say that human beings are simple creatures. We are magnificently complex in our capacities, our potential, our ability to create and destroy and transform. But the principles that guide a fulfilling life, the laws that govern psychological health, the requirements for genuine happiness, these are surprisingly straightforward. Love what serves life in you and around you. Release what diminishes life in you and around you. Pay attention to what your deeper nature is trying to tell you. Act from your authentic center rather than from fear or the desire to please others. Include rather than exclude the parts of yourself you would prefer to deny. Choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience, your own path over the well-worn roads of others. These are not complicated prescriptions. They do not require years of study or extensive training. They require only the courage to be honest about what you observe in yourself and the willingness to act on that honesty. Yet we flee from this simplicity as if it were poison. We create elaborate systems of belief, complex methodologies for self-improvement, intricate explanations for our suffering. We would rather spend years learning about ourselves than 5 minutes actually being ourselves. I remember sitting in my study one evening, surrounded by books on psychology, philosophy, theology. I had spent the day writing about the complexities of human consciousness, the intricate dynamics of the collective unconscious. And suddenly I was struck by the absurdity of it all. Here I was, analyzing the human soul with the same approach one might use to dissect a mechanical device, when the soul itself was speaking to me in the most direct language imaginable. The fire in the hearth was warm. The silence was peaceful. My body was tired from the day's work. These simple sensations contained more wisdom about the nature of existence than all my theoretical constructions. But I had been so busy thinking about life that I had forgotten to live it. This is the trap we fall into repeatedly. We mistake the map for the territory, the description for the experience, the theory for the reality. We become so fascinated by our explanations of life that we lose contact with life itself. The unconscious does not send us dreams so that we can analyze them endlessly. It sends us dreams so that we can receive their gifts. It does not create symptoms so that we can theorize about their origins. It creates symptoms to wake us up, to get our attention, to force us to change direction when we are heading towards spiritual death. But we have made a profession out of avoiding these simple messages. We have entire industries devoted to complicating what the soul is trying to tell us in the most straightforward terms. We have experts who can spend hours explaining why you feel empty, but who never ask the simple question, what would make you feel full? I think of another patient, a successful businessman who came to me complaining of terrible anxiety. He could not sleep, could not concentrate, felt constantly on edge. He had consulted numerous specialists, tried various medications, explored countless psychological theories about the nature of his condition. But when I asked him to describe a typical day in his life, the source of his anxiety became immediately apparent. He woke each morning and immediately began a series of activities that he despised. He worked with people he did not respect, in a profession that bored him. He came home to a house that felt like a prison, and a family with whom he could not be authentic. Every moment of his existence was a betrayal of his deeper nature. His anxiety was not a mysterious psychological condition requiring complex treatment. It was his soul's desperate attempt to communicate a simple truth: this life is killing you. But rather than listen to this message, he wanted to find ways to make the anxiety disappear so he could continue living inauthentically without discomfort. This is what we do when we complicate things unnecessarily. We try to treat the symptoms while ignoring the cause. We want to feel better without changing anything fundamental about how we live. We want peace without giving up the behaviors that create conflict. We want joy without releasing the attachments that bind us to misery. The unconscious, however, is relentlessly practical. It cares nothing for our elaborate justifications or our sophisticated theories. It cares only about what serves life and what destroys it. And it will continue to create whatever experiences are necessary to wake us up to this simple distinction. Sometimes this awakening comes through suffering. The depression that will not lift, despite all our efforts to analyze it away. The relationship that keeps failing, no matter how much we try to understand its dynamics. The creative block that persists despite all our techniques for overcoming it. These are not punishments. They are invitations to simplicity. What if instead of asking why you are depressed, you asked what in your life is not serving your authentic nature? What if instead of analyzing why your relationships fail, you asked whether you are capable of love in this moment? What if instead of trying to force creativity, you asked what wants to be born through you? These questions cut through complexity like a sword through silk. They bypass all our elaborate defenses and go straight to the heart of the matter. But they require something we often lack: the willingness to hear answers we might not like. The modern mind has been trained to believe that if something is simple, it cannot be profound. We have confused complexity with depth, sophistication with wisdom. We think that if we can understand something quickly, it must not be important. But the most essential truths are often the most obvious ones. Love is better than hate. Truth is better than lies. Authenticity is better than performance. Growth is better than stagnation. These are not complicated philosophical positions requiring extensive justification. They are simple recognitions that arise naturally when we are in contact with our deeper wisdom, yet we resist them because they demand something from us. They require that we change, that we risk, that we give up the familiar misery for an unknown possibility of fulfillment. And change, even positive change, activates our deepest fears. So we complicate things as a way of postponing action. We tell ourselves we need to understand more, analyze deeper, gather more information before we can move forward. But often what we call understanding is simply another form of avoidance. We use thinking as a substitute for living, analysis as a replacement for experience. I have seen people spend their entire lives preparing to live without ever actually beginning. They study themselves endlessly, explore their patterns thoroughly, understand their psychology completely, but they never take the simple step of acting on what they know to be true. The path of individuation, becoming who you truly are, does not require a map. It requires only the willingness to take the next step that presents itself to respond authentically to whatever life offers in this moment. But we want guarantees, certainties, detailed instructions for the journey ahead. The unconscious laughs at our demand for certainty. It offers only the next right step, the immediate response, the present moment's requirement. It asks not that we understand the entire path, but that we trust the intelligence that has brought us this far. This trust is perhaps the simplest and most difficult thing we can learn, simple because it requires no special knowledge or technique, difficult because it means giving up the illusion of control, the fantasy that we can think our way to safety, the belief that complexity will somehow protect us from uncertainty. But life itself is uncertain. The future is unknown. The only security lies in developing the capacity to respond creatively to whatever arises. And this capacity comes not from having all the answers, but from being willing to live the questions, to remain open to what wants, to emerge. The soul knows this. It has always known this. It speaks to us constantly in the language of intuition, instinct, bodily sensation, emotional response. But we have forgotten how to listen because we have been taught that this ancient wisdom is primitive, unreliable, unscientific. So we create elaborate systems to replace what we already possess naturally. We develop complex methods for accessing what is always available. We study techniques for becoming what we already are, and in doing so we move further and further away from the simple truth that we carry within us, the capacity for wisdom, for love, for creative response to life's challenges. The tragedy is not that we lack this capacity. The tragedy is that we have convinced ourselves we lack it. We have traded our birthright of natural knowing for the false security of borrowed concepts. We have exchanged the living wisdom of our own experience for dead theories about how life should be lived. But it is never too late to return to simplicity. It is never too late to begin listening again to the voice that has never stopped speaking within us. It is never too late to trust the intelligence of our own nature, to honor the wisdom of our own experience, to live from the center of our being rather than from the periphery of our fears. This return to simplicity is not a regression. It is not a rejection of learning or growth or development. It is a recognition that all true learning serves only to remove the obstacles to our natural wisdom. All genuine growth leads us back to our essential nature. All real development is simply the uncovering of what was always already there. The complicated theories, the elaborate explanations, the sophisticated analyses, they may have their place, but they are not ends in themselves. They are, at best, temporary scaffolding that can be removed once the building of authentic life is complete. And what is this authentic life? It is nothing more and nothing less than the courage to be yourself in each moment, to respond truthfully to what life presents, to follow the thread of your own deepest knowing wherever it may lead. Simple, terrifyingly simple. And because it is simple, it is available to you right now. You know what strikes me most profoundly about this resistance to simplicity? It is that we have made suffering into an art form. We have become virtuosos of our own misery, composing elaborate symphonies of pain when all that is required is to stop playing the wrong notes. I watch people cling to their suffering as if it were a precious possession. They polish it, analyze it, share it at dinner parties like fine wine. Let me tell you about my trauma, they say, and then proceed to recite a story they have told so many times it has become more real to them than their actual life. They have confused the story of their pain with their identity itself. But what if I told you that most of our suffering is nothing more than a habit, a pattern we learn so early, so thoroughly, that we mistake it for our nature. The child who was ignored learns to create drama, to get attention. 50 years later, that same child, now in an adult body, is still creating drama, still trying to be seen, but no longer remembers why. The solution is so simple it feels almost insulting to the elaborate edifice of pain they have constructed. Stop creating drama. But, you see how the mind recoils from such simplicity? Surely it cannot be that easy. Surely there must be deeper work to do, more analysis required, more understanding to achieve. I have sat across from brilliant people who could explain their psychological patterns with stunning clarity. They knew exactly why they chose unavailable partners, precisely how their childhood shaped their fear of intimacy, thoroughly understood the dynamics that kept them trapped in unfulfilling relationships. They had maps of their psyche, more detailed than any cartographer's work, yet they continued choosing unavailable partners. Understanding had become another way of avoiding change. They collected insights like trophies, but never took the simple step of choosing differently. Because choosing differently would mean giving up the familiar pain, and familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar joy. This is the great paradox of human nature. We are capable of extraordinary complexity, yet we are driven by remarkably simple needs. We need to be seen, to be valued, to belong, to create, to grow. But instead of pursuing these needs directly, we create elaborate substitutes. Instead of seeking real connection, we perform for approval. Instead of creating authentically, we produce what we think will be impressive. Instead of growing naturally, we force ourselves through prescribed programs of improvement. The unconscious watches all this artifice with infinite patience. It knows that eventually the performance will exhaust us. Eventually, the substitutes will fail to satisfy. Eventually, we will have no choice but to return to what is real. I remember a dream that came to me during a particularly difficult period of my life. I was in a vast library, surrounded by thousands of books on human psychology. I was frantically searching through them, trying to find the answer to some urgent question. But the more I searched, the more confused I became. The books seemed to multiply, the words blurred together. The knowledge became meaningless noise. Then, in the dream, I heard my own voice calling to me from outside the library. I followed the sound and found myself standing in a simple garden. There was no complexity here, no analysis, no theories, just earth and water and growing things. And in that simplicity, the answer to my urgent question became immediately clear. When I woke, I understood. I had been searching in books for what could only be found in living. I had been analyzing life instead of experiencing it. I had been so busy being a psychologist that I had forgotten to be a human being. This is what happens when we make our problems more important than our lives. We become professional sufferers, expert analyzers, sophisticated understanders. But we forget how to simply be present with what is actually happening right now. The present moment is radically simple. It contains only what is, not what was or what might be. It asks nothing from us except presence. But we flee from this simplicity because the present moment often contains things we would prefer not to feel. Sadness, uncertainty, the quiet recognition that we have been living someone else's dream. So we escape into the past, where we can endlessly rehearse our grievances, or into the future, where we can anxiously prepare for disasters that may never come. We live everywhere except where life is actually happening. The body knows this. The body is always in the present moment. It cannot be anywhere else. When you are truly present with your body, when you listen to what it is telling you, the complexity falls away. This person makes me feel contracted. This activity energizes me. This environment drains my life force. This choice feels aligned with my nature. These are not complex psychological insights requiring years of training to understand. They are immediate physical recognitions available to anyone willing to pay attention. But we have been taught to distrust the body's wisdom, to override its signals with our mental constructions. I think of the countless hours I have spent with people who knew exactly what their body was telling them but refused to listen. The woman whose stomach clenched every time she thought about her job, who spent years in therapy exploring why she felt anxious about work instead of simply finding different work. The man whose entire body relaxed when he spoke about painting, who never painted because he could not figure out how to make it financially viable. The body is not interested in our financial plans or our social obligations. It knows only what serves life and what diminishes it. And it communicates this knowledge with ruthless clarity if we will listen. But listening to the body means we might have to change our lives in ways that inconvenience others. We might have to disappoint people who depend on us, remaining as we are. We might have to admit that we have been living according to others' values rather than our own. This is why we complicate things. Complexity gives us permission to delay action. If the problem is intricate enough, we can spend years studying it without ever having to solve it. If our psychological patterns are sufficiently elaborate, we can devote our lives to understanding them without ever having to change them. But the soul grows impatient with our delays. It begins to speak more loudly, more insistently. The anxiety increases, the depression deepens, the sense of emptiness expands. These are not signs that we need more analysis. They are signs that we need more action, more honesty, more willingness to live according to our own truth rather than others' expectations. I have watched people transform their entire lives with a single decision, not a complex decision, not one requiring extensive preparation or analysis, but a simple choice to honor what they knew to be true. The decision to leave a marriage that had been dead for years, the decision to pursue work that called to them despite the financial uncertainty, the decision to speak truthfully instead of saying what others wanted to hear. In each case, the decision itself was simple. What was difficult was getting to the point where they were willing to make it. They had to exhaust themselves with complexity first. They had to try every elaborate solution, explore every sophisticated theory, attempt every complicated intervention. Only when all of these failed did they return to the simple truth that had been waiting for them all along. This is perhaps the most compassionate thing I can tell you about human nature. We are not failing when we complicate things unnecessarily. We are simply taking the long way home. Some of us need to wander in the wilderness of complexity before we appreciate the oasis of simplicity. Some of us need to exhaust ourselves with analysis before we trust the wisdom of direct experience. The unconscious understands this. It does not judge our detours. It simply continues to offer the same simple guidance over and over in different forms through different experiences until we are finally ready to receive it. But what about those who never seem to tire of complexity, who spend their entire lives analyzing, theorizing, explaining, but never changing? I have great compassion for these souls because I understand what drives them. They have confused understanding with transformation. They believe that If they can explain their patterns thoroughly enough, the patterns will somehow change on their own. This is like believing that studying a map of a country is the same as visiting it. The map may be accurate, detailed, beautifully drawn, but it is not the territory. It cannot give you the experience of walking on that soil, breathing that air, meeting those people. In the same way, psychological understanding cannot give you the experience of living differently. It can only point toward that possibility. The actual transformation requires something much simpler and much more frightening than understanding. It requires the willingness to step into the unknown. The unknown is where life lives. It is where creativity emerges, where authentic relationship becomes possible, where we discover capacities we never knew we possessed. But the unknown is also where our carefully constructed identities dissolve, where our familiar defenses prove inadequate, where we must rely on something deeper than our mental constructions. This deeper something is what I call the self with a capital S, not the ego self with all its strategies and defenses, but the essential self that exists prior to all our psychological elaborations. This self knows how to live, how to create. It knows how to love. It knows respond appropriately to whatever life presentation and fear we have taught. But we have buried this self under layers of conditioning, expect ourselves not to trust its guidance because its guidance is often inconvenient. It asks us to be honest when lying would be easier. It asks us to risk when safety would be more comfortable. It asks us to love when protecting ourselves would be more prudent. Yet this self is the only reliable guide we have for navigating the complexities of human existence. Not because it makes things simple, but because it cuts through the unnecessary complications we create. It distinguishes between what is essential and what is merely habitual. It knows the difference between what serves life and what merely serves the ego's desire for security. When you learn to consult this deeper wisdom, decision-making becomes remarkably straightforward. Not easy, perhaps, but clear. You know whether a relationship nourishes you or depletes you. You know whether your work expresses your authentic nature or merely pays your bills. You know whether your choices are moving you toward life or toward a kind of spiritual death. This knowing does not come through analysis. It comes through attention, through the willingness to feel what you are actually feeling rather than what you think you should feel, through the courage to want what you actually want rather than what seems appropriate to want. I think of the dreams that visit us in the night. They do not arrive with footnotes and explanations. They do not provide complex interpretations of their own symbolism. They simply present images, feelings, scenarios that bypass our rational defenses and speak directly to the soul. A woman dreams of a house with rooms she has never explored. She does not need a psychology degree to understand that this dream is inviting her to discover unexplored aspects of herself. A man dreams of being chased by a wild animal. He does not need extensive training to recognize that some instinctual energy he has been avoiding is demanding his attention. The dream speaks in the language of direct experience. It does not explain, it reveals. It does not analyze, it presents. And in that presentation, something in us recognizes truth. Not because we understand it intellectually, but because we feel its resonance in our bodies, in our emotions, in some deep place that knows without knowing how it knows. This is the intelligence we must learn to trust again. Not the intelligence that explains and analyzes and categorizes, but the intelligence that recognizes and responds and creates. The intelligence that knew how to walk before we learned the mechanics of walking. The intelligence that knew how to love before we learned theories about attachment and relationship dynamics. We are born with this intelligence. Every child possesses it naturally. They know immediately who feels safe and who does not. They know what activities bring them joy and which ones drain their energy. They know when they are being authentic and when they are performing. But we train this intelligence out of them. We teach them to override their instincts, to doubt their perceptions, to trust external authorities more than their own inner knowing. We do this with the best intentions, believing we are preparing them for the complexities of adult life. But often we are simply passing wisdom. The paths on our own disconnection from natural paying attention again, to noticed. It requires only the willingness to begin what your body tells you about. Back to this intelligence is not complicate the people in your life. To observe what activities make you feel more alive and which ones make you feel dead inside. To recognize the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of wisdom. Fear speaks in urgent, repetitive patterns. It tells the same stories over and over, always predicting disaster, always demanding immediate action to prevent catastrophe. Wisdom speaks more quietly, more spaciously. It offers perspective rather than panic, possibility rather than paralysis. But we have become so accustomed to the voice of fear that we mistake it for wisdom. We think anxiety is alertness, worry is preparation, doubt is discernment. We have confused the ego's desperate attempts to maintain control with the soul's natural intelligence. The soul is not concerned with control. It is concerned with flow, with responding creatively to whatever arises. It trusts that we have the capacity to meet life's challenges as they come without needing to prepare for every possible contingency. It knows that the intelligence that has brought us this far can be trusted to guide us forward. This trust is perhaps the simplest and most radical thing we can cultivate. Not trust in any external authority, but trust in the life force that moves through us, that dreams our dreams, that calls us toward growth and creativity and authentic expression. When you begin to live from this trust, the complications begin to dissolve naturally, not because life becomes simpler, but because you stop making it more complicated than it needs to be. You stop arguing with reality and begin dancing with it instead. You stop trying to control outcomes and begin focusing on authentic response. This is what I mean when I say life is not that complicated. The living of it, the actual day-to-day experience of being human, operates according to principles so fundamental that a child can understand them. Be honest, pay attention, choose what serves life, release what diminishes it. Trust the intelligence that moves through you. These are not sophisticated psychological techniques. They are simply the requirements for authentic existence. But they ask everything of us, because they ask us to give up the false security of our complications and step into the uncertainty of genuine aliveness. And this, perhaps, is why we resist simplicity so fiercely. Not because it is difficult to understand, but because it is impossible to understand without being changed by it. Complexity allows us to remain as we are while feeling like we are growing. Simplicity demands actual transformation. The choice is always ours. We can continue to elaborate our suffering, to analyze our patterns, to understand our problems with ever greater sophistication. Or we can take the simple step of living differently. Not tomorrow, when we have figured everything out, but now, in this moment, with whatever clarity we currently possess. The soul does not wait for perfect understanding. It acts from whatever light is available, and in that action more light appears. This is how we grow, how we heal, how we become who we truly are. Not through complexity, but through the courage to be simple in a world that has forgotten how. The unconscious has no patience for our elaborate detours. It will use whatever means necessary to bring us back to truth. Sometimes this happens through what we call a crisis, but which is really just life refusing to support our pretenses any longer. I have seen this countless times. A man spends 20 years building a career he never wanted, telling himself he is being responsible, mature, practical. Then one morning he wakes up and simply cannot go to work. His body refuses. His soul stages a revolt. What we might call a breakdown is actually a breakthrough. The false structure collapses, and for the first time in decades, space opens for something real to emerge. But how do we respond to such moments? We pathologize them, we medicate them, we rush to rebuild the same structure that was suffocating us, just more quickly this time, because we are terrified of the emptiness, the not knowing, the space between who we were and who we might become. Yet this space is sacred. It is the womb of transformation. Nothing new can be born without it. But we have been conditioned to fill every silence, to occupy every void, to have an answer for every question. We cannot bear to simply not know for a while. I remember the profound disorientation I experienced during my confrontation with the unconscious. For months, I felt as though I were dissolving, as though everything I had thought I knew about myself was crumbling away. The temptation was enormous to grasp onto something, anything, to give me a sense of solid ground. But something deeper than my fear whispered, "Let it crumble, let it all fall away." What remains when everything falls has been stripped away is what you truly are. And what you truly are cannot be destroyed by the collapse of what you thought you were. This is perhaps the most terrifying discovery we can make about ourselves. We are not who we think we are. The personality we have constructed, the identity we defend so fiercely, the self-image we maintain so carefully, these are all costumes we have mistaken for our skin. Beneath the costume is something vast and mysterious and utterly simple. Some traditions call it the soul, others call it Buddha nature or the Christ within. I call it the self, but the name matters less than the recognition. There is something in you that existed before your conditioning began and will exist after all your defenses have crumbled. This something is what I mean when I speak of simplicity. Not the simplicity of ignorance, but the simplicity that lies on the other side of complexity. The simplicity that emerges when we have exhausted all our strategies for avoiding reality and finally surrender to what is. A woman comes to me, convinced that her life is impossibly complicated. She has 3 children from 2 marriages, a demanding career, aging parents who need care, financial pressures, health concerns. She recites this list as if it were evidence of some cosmic conspiracy against her peace of mind. But as we sit together in the quiet of my study, something else emerges. Beneath all the apparent complexity is a simple pattern. She says yes when she means no. She gives when she wants to receive. She performs strength when she feels vulnerable. She has been living everyone else's life except her own. The solution is simple, but not easy. Learn to say no. Learn to ask for what you need. Learn to show your vulnerability instead of hiding it. But these simple changes require her to disappoint people, to risk rejection, to appear selfish to those who benefit from her self-sacrifice. So she prefers the complexity. It allows her to remain a victim of circumstances, rather than the author of her choices. It gives her something to blame for her unhappiness. It provides an endless supply of problems to solve instead of the one fundamental change she needs to make. This is how we use complexity as a defense against transformation. We create elaborate explanations for our suffering, so we do not have to face the simple truth that we are suffering because we are living against our nature. But nature itself operates according to principles of elegant simplicity. A tree does not analyze whether it should grow toward the light. A river does not debate the best path to the sea. A bird does not question whether it should sing. They simply follow the intelligence that moves through them, and in doing so, they fulfill their purpose effortlessly. We are the only creatures who argue with our own nature. We are the only ones who convince ourselves that what feels wrong is actually right, that what depletes us is actually good for us, that what our soul rejects is what we should embrace. The price of this argument with ourselves is enormous. We develop symptoms, neurosis, addictions. We create drama to feel alive, chaos to feel important, suffering to feel real. We exhaust ourselves maintaining personas that have nothing to do with who we actually are. I think of the dreams that come to those caught in this exhausting performance. Often they are dreams of simplicity. A woman trapped in a loveless marriage dreams of walking alone in a meadow, feeling peace for the first time in years. A man drowning in professional obligations dreams of sitting by a lake fishing with no sense of time or urgency. These are not escape fantasies. They are the soul's memory of what life feels like when it is lived authentically. They are invitations to remember that beneath all our complications lies a simple core of being that knows how to rest, how to enjoy, how to simply exist without needing to prove anything to anyone. But we dismiss such dreams as unrealistic. We tell ourselves we have responsibilities, obligations, commitments. We cannot just walk away from everything and sit by a lake, and this is true. But we are missing the deeper message. The dream is not telling us to abandon our lives. It is telling us to find the lake within ourselves, to discover the place of peace that exists regardless of external circumstances. This internal lake, this core of simplicity, is always available, but we have forgotten how to access it because we have been trained to believe that peace is something we must earn, that rest is something we must deserve, that joy is something that comes only after we have solved all our problems. The unconscious laughs at these beliefs. It knows that peace is our natural state, that joy is our birthright, that rest is not a reward but a requirement for authentic living. But to access these gifts, we must be willing to stop the endless doing, analyzing, and improving that keeps us distracted from simply being. I have sat with dying people who, in their final weeks, suddenly discover this simplicity. All the things that seemed so important, so urgent, so complicated fade away. What remains is startlingly simple: love, beauty, presence, the taste of water, the warmth of sunlight, the face of someone dear. They often express regret that it took dying to teach them how to live, but it need not be so. We can choose to die to the false complications while we are still alive. We can let the unnecessary fall away now, instead of waiting for death to strip it from us. This is what I call voluntary simplicity. Not the external simplicity of owning fewer possessions, though that may be part of it, but the internal simplicity of releasing our attachment to unnecessary suffering, our addiction to drama, our compulsion to make everything more difficult than it needs to be. When you begin to live from this internal simplicity, people will not understand. They will accuse you of being naive, of not taking life seriously enough, of avoiding your responsibilities. They will be uncomfortable with your peace because it reflects their own lack of peace. They will try to draw you back into the complexity because misery loves company, but so does unconsciousness. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of choosing simplicity in a complex world. You become a mirror that reflects others' unnecessary complications back to them. Your presence becomes a question mark that challenges their assumption that life must be as difficult as they are making it. But you cannot allow others' discomfort to pull you back into the maze of complications you have worked so hard to escape. You cannot sacrifice your peace to maintain their comfort. This does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means caring enough about truth to live it, even when others prefer illusion. The path of individuation, becoming who you truly are, is ultimately a path of simplification. It is the gradual stripping away of everything that is not essential until what remains is pure, undiluted being. But this stripping away can feel like death because, in many ways, it is death. The death of the false self, the ego's death grip on complexity, the mind's death wish for problems to solve. What emerges from this death is not a diminished life, but an intensified one. When you stop spreading your energy across 1,000 unnecessary concerns, you have tremendous energy available for what truly matters. When you stop performing for others, you can finally show up authentically for yourself and those you love. When you stop arguing with reality, you can begin dancing with it. This dance with reality is what life looks like when it is lived simply. Not the simple-minded avoidance of complexity, but the wise recognition of what deserves our attention and what does not. The ability to respond to genuine complexity with genuine intelligence while refusing to be seduced by artificial complications. I remember watching a master calligrapher at work. His movements were so simple, so economical, yet they produced the most beautiful characters. Every stroke was necessary, nothing was wasted, everything served the whole. This is how life can be lived. When we stop adding unnecessary flourishes to our existence, the brush moves from the center, the action arises from stillness. The complexity of the finished work emerges from the simplicity of each moment's response. This is the art of living that the unconscious is always trying to teach us if we will listen, but listening requires silence, and silence requires that we stop filling every moment with noise, every thought with analysis, every feeling with interpretation. We must create space for the deeper intelligence to speak, and it speaks only in the language of simplicity. When you finally hear this voice, really hear it, you will be amazed at how straightforward its guidance is. It does not offer complex strategies or elaborate theories. It says simply, this serves life, this does not. This person nourishes you, this one drains you. This choice moves you toward wholeness, this one fragments you further. The guidance is always available. It has been speaking to you your entire life. But you have been too busy complicating things to hear it, too busy analyzing to experience, too busy becoming to simply be. Now is the moment to stop. Now is the moment to listen. Now is the moment to choose simplicity over complexity, presence over performance, truth over convenience. Not because it is easy, but because it is real. And reality, however challenging, is always simpler than the elaborate fantasies we create to avoid it. The unconscious waits patiently for this moment of recognition. It has all the time in the world because it exists outside of time, in that eternal now where all authentic living takes place. It watches our detours with compassion, knowing that eventually we will exhaust ourselves with complexity and return home to the simplicity that was always there, waiting. This homecoming is not a destination but a recognition. You do not arrive at simplicity. You remember that you never left it. Beneath all the layers of conditioning, beneath all the strategies and defenses, beneath all the complicated stories you tell about yourself, the simple truth of your being has been patiently waiting. You are not your problems. You are not your patterns. You are not your past or your fears about the future. You are the awareness in which all these things arise and dissolve. And awareness itself is utterly simple. It needs nothing, lacks nothing, complicates nothing. It simply is. When you rest in this recognition, when you stop trying to improve or understand or fix yourself and simply allow yourself to be, something miraculous happens. Life begins to live itself through you. Not the effortful, complicated life of the ego, but the natural, flowing life of existence itself. This is what the great masters have always known, what the mystics have always taught, what your own deepest wisdom has always whispered. Life is not that complicated. You are not that complicated. The path forward is not that complicated. What is complicated is all the resistance to this simplicity, all the elaborate structures we build to avoid it, all the sophisticated reasons we give for not trusting it. But even this resistance serves a purpose. It exhausts us thoroughly so that when we finally surrender to simplicity, we appreciate it completely. Perhaps the most profound realization that came to me in my later years was this: we have forgotten how to receive. We have become a civilization of givers who do not know how to take in what life offers us freely, constantly, without condition. I watch people exhaust themselves trying to earn what has already been given. They work frantically to deserve love that surrounds them like air. They strive desperately to achieve peace that exists in this very moment, asking nothing from them but recognition. They search everywhere for meaning, while standing in the middle of a meaningful existence. This forgetting how to receive is perhaps our greatest tragedy, and it stems from the simplest of misunderstandings. We believe we must earn our place in existence. We believe we must justify our being here. We believe that life is something that happens to us rather than something we are an integral part of. But watch a child for a moment. See how naturally they receive the warmth of sunlight, the taste of sweet fruit, the comfort of being held. They do not question whether they deserve these gifts. They do not analyze whether they have worked hard enough to merit such blessings. They simply open themselves and allow life to pour through them. This capacity for reception is not naivety. It is wisdom. It recognizes that existence itself is generous, that consciousness is a gift we did nothing to earn, that every breath we take is an offering from a universe that supports our being here without requiring our permission or our worthiness. Yet somewhere in our development, we learn to close these natural channels of reception. We are taught that taking is selfish, that receiving makes us dependent, that we must give more than we take to be good people. And so we begin the exhausting project of trying to deserve our own existence. I have sat with people who could not accept a compliment without immediately deflecting it or returning one, who could not receive help without feeling guilty, who could not enjoy pleasure without finding something wrong with it. They had trained themselves to reject the very nourishment their souls required. And what creates this closing? Fear, of course. The fear that if we truly receive, we will become obligated. The fear that if we allow ourselves to be nourished, we will become weak. The fear that if we open ourselves to life's gifts, we will somehow lose our independence, our strength, our ability to survive. But this is precisely backwards. The person who cannot receive, becomes desperately needy. They become manipulative because they cannot ask directly for what they require. They become controlling because they cannot trust that their needs will be met naturally. They become exhausted because they are trying to generate internally what can only come from connection with something larger than themselves. I remember a man who prided himself on his self-sufficiency. He needed nothing from anyone, he claimed. He could take care of himself completely. But as we worked together, it became clear that his entire life was organized around getting people to give him what he could not directly receive. He created crises so others would rescue him. He performed helplessness so others would take care of him. He had become the most dependent person I knew, precisely because he refused to acknowledge his natural need for nourishment from others and from life itself. The unconscious understands what the ego refuses to accept. We are not separate, self-contained units struggling for survival in a hostile universe. We are part of an interconnected web of existence that naturally supports and nourishes all its parts. But to access this support, we must learn to receive it. This receiving is not passive. It requires a kind of active openness, a deliberate softening of the barriers we have erected against life's generosity. It means allowing yourself to be touched by beauty without immediately trying to possess it. It means accepting love without immediately calculating what you owe in return. It means receiving wisdom without immediately trying to teach it to someone else. I think of the patients who came to me not really seeking to heal, but seeking to become better at managing their wounds. They wanted more sophisticated strategies for coping with their pain, more elaborate theories to explain their suffering, more complex techniques for controlling their symptoms, but they did not want to receive the healing that was available in each moment of genuine presence, in each breath consciously taken, in each moment of simply being held by existence itself. Healing, you see, is not something we do. It is something we allow. It is not an achievement, but a reception. The body knows how to heal itself if we stop interfering with its natural processes. The psyche knows how to integrate its fragments if we stop forcing premature wholeness. The soul knows how to find its way if we stop insisting on controlling the journey. But we have been trained to believe that healing requires effort, that growth demands struggle, that transformation must be painful. And so we approach our own development like a military campaign, with strategies and goals and measures of success. We turn the gentle art of receiving what we need into the exhausting project of earning what we think we lack. Watch how nature receives. The tree does not struggle to photosynthesize. It simply opens its leaves to the sun and allows the light to transform into life. The flower does not work to attract bees. It simply opens its beauty and allows pollination to occur naturally. The river does not effort its way to the sea. It follows the path of least resistance and arrives exactly where it needs to be. This is the intelligence we must remember, not the intelligence that plans and controls and manipulates, but the intelligence that opens and receives and allows. The intelligence that knows we are already part of what we seek, already connected to what we need, already held by what we fear we must earn. I have watched people transform not through great efforts at self-improvement, but through the simple recognition that they were already loved, already worthy, already enough, not because of what they had accomplished, but because of what they were, not because of what they had given, but because of their capacity to receive what was being offered. This recognition is not a thought, but an experience. It happens in moments of grace when the defenses suddenly drop, and we feel ourselves held by something larger than our individual will. In moments when we stop trying to prove our worth and simply allow ourselves to be seen, in moments when we cease the endless effort to become someone better and rest in the recognition of who we already are, these moments cannot be manufactured, but they can be invited. They come when we create space for reception, rather than filling every moment with activity. They come when we allow silence instead of constantly generating noise. They come when we stop giving compulsively and learn to receive gracefully. The capacity to receive is intimately connected with the capacity to be present. You cannot receive what life is offering if you are always somewhere else, planning the future or rehearsing the past. Reception happens only in this moment, with this breath, in this body, with these particular circumstances. But presence itself has become a lost art. We are always preparing for life rather than living it, always getting ready for the real thing rather than recognizing that this is the real thing, always working towards some future moment of readiness rather than opening to what is available right now. I remember sitting in my garden one evening, watching the light change as the sun set. For a moment I stopped thinking about my work, my responsibilities, my theories about human nature. I simply received the colors, the coolness of the air, the sounds of birds settling for the night. And in that moment of pure reception, I understood something that years of analysis had not taught me. I understood that this capacity to receive the simple gifts of existence is not a luxury, but a necessity. It is how we nourish the soul. It is how we remember our connection to the whole. It is how we access the wisdom that exists not in our minds, but in our participation in the larger intelligence of life itself. When we cannot receive, we become spiritually malnourished. We may be surrounded by beauty, but we cannot take it in. We may be offered love, but we cannot accept it. We may be given opportunities for joy, but we cannot allow ourselves to experience them. We become like people starving in the midst of abundance, not because the nourishment is not available, but because we have forgotten how to eat. This forgetting affects every aspect of our lives. We cannot receive compliments, so we never know our positive impact on others. We cannot receive help, so we exhaust ourselves trying to do everything alone. We cannot receive pleasure, so we live in a state of chronic deprivation. We cannot receive our own feelings, so we remain strangers to ourselves. Most tragically, we cannot receive the love that surrounds us constantly. Not just the love of other people, though that too, but the love that existence itself has for its own creations. The love that keeps our hearts beating without our conscious effort. The love that provides us with exactly the right atmosphere to breathe. The love that offers us beauty in countless forms every day. This love asks nothing from us except recognition. It does not demand that we be worthy or good or accomplished. It loves us because we exist, not because of what we do with our existence. But to feel this love, we must be willing to receive it, and receiving it changes everything. When you truly receive love, not as something you have earned, but as something you are immersed in, you stop trying to manipulate others into giving you what you think you lack. You stop performing for approval because you already feel approved of by life itself. You stop working frantically to deserve your place because you recognize that your place was given to you freely. This does not make you passive or dependent. Paradoxically, it makes you more genuinely active, more truly generous. When you are nourished by your capacity to receive, you have something real to give. When you accept the gifts that life offers freely, You can offer gifts freely in return, but when you cannot receive, your giving becomes compulsive, manipulative, exhausting. You give to earn love rather than from love. You give to create obligation rather than from freedom. You give to prove your worth rather than from your inherent worthiness. And so we return to where we began, but with eyes that see differently now. You came seeking understanding about the complexity of existence, and perhaps you have discovered something far more precious. You have discovered that the very simplicity you feared was not simplicity at all, but the profound recognition of what has always been true. The unconscious has been speaking to you through every word, every pause, every moment of recognition that stirred within you as we walked this path together. It has been reminding you of what you knew before the world taught you to doubt yourself. It has been calling you home to the person you were before you learned to be someone else. This is not the end of something, but the beginning. The beginning of listening to that quiet voice within you that knows. The beginning of trusting what your body tells you about the life you are living. The beginning of choosing what serves your deepest nature rather than what serves your fears. Life is not that complicated, my friend, but living it authentically, living it simply, living it from the center of your being rather than the periphery of your defenses, this asks everything of you. It asks you to be real in a world that rewards pretense. It asks you to be simple in a culture that worships complexity. It asks you to trust the intelligence of your own nature in a time when we have forgotten that such intelligence exists. The choice is yours now, as it has always been. You can return to the elaborate maze of complications, armed now with new theories about simplicity, or you can take the single step that changes everything. You can listen to what you already know. You can trust what you have always felt. You can begin in this moment to live from the truth that needs no explanation, because it is alive within you. The unconscious waits. Your authentic self waits. Life itself waits for you to remember that you are not a problem to be solved, but a being to be lived, simply, truthfully, completely. Now,